I'm Donny.
And I'm Anthony.
And we make up the GW Branding Group, here to bring you the Off the Ground podcast. The podcast where we interview entrepreneurs and find out how they got their businesses off the ground.
Hey everybody, this is Anthony and Donny, and we are the Off the Ground podcast here today with Chrissie White with Co-Family Mediation. And we are all about bringing on successful entrepreneurs and learning more about their business and how they got it off the ground. So thank you for coming on today, and we'd love to hear your story.
Well, thanks so much for having me and considering me a successful entrepreneur. We'll see, I guess, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, just to start, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
I am a Hoosier, a small-town Indiana girl. Came up to the big Windy City for law school after just kind of always knowing that I wanted to pursue a career that was meaningful and that helped people, essentially. I love to communicate. I love to write. I've always been opinionated, but also moderate in my views at times. You know, I found that as an advocate and an attorney, I'm really kind of vibing with the mediation route because I am finding that there are a lot of ways we can find common ground with people. So, you know, I'm a middle child from the Midwest, middle America, millennial. You know, I grew up with three siblings. You know, I'm the middle of the girls. So there are three girls and one boy. But I've always been one to try to be a peacemaker, to try to be sensible, reasonable, but ambitious too. One thing that I was thinking about when I was thinking about how did this all come about, and I think it comes back to like my parents. When we were each kid, when we turned 10, we got to go out to California with my dad to visit his brother and sister-in-law, who's my aunt. She is a judge in Los Angeles. Her name's Elizabeth, and she was just really influential in that 10-year-old trip. I remember all three of my siblings had different experiences. They went out to like Universal Studios. They went to Disneyland. I went to court. So it just happened to be the thing that I got to do. And I got to watch her kind of admonish a person, but also really just do something that I found really professional and admirable. And she just looked so cool up there. I just really thought, you know, this is interesting. And so I every time I would see her after that, I'd talk to her about her career, and it kind of just led me in that way, in a way.
So, I mean, what steered you towards the mediation?
I think that specifically my law school, DePaul, was really well known for family law. And, you know, I always grew up also with a passion for children and helping kids and being an advocate in that role. And that's why I chose DePaul. It was something that they were very well known for, their family law department. And I just thought that if I was going to practice law, I wanted to do something that I would be passionate about, something that I could really make a difference in people's lives with. There are very many different areas of law you can go into, and actually, Aunt Elizabeth had told me several times not to do family law because it's actually very difficult at times. You know, it's a lot different than what you see in a criminal case or even a civil litigation matter, because those things have happened.
Yeah.
But your family, as the divorce is happening, you're still parenting, you're co-parenting then, and so it is a different animal. You know, there's a little bit of a moving target at times, and you're not dealing with just one incident. You're dealing with somebody's life and how it's changing massively and legally, and so yeah, you just, when you go into law school, you kind of have an open mind in what you might do. I just knew that I'm a people person. I'm an empath. I'm a kind of a good listener. I try to be somebody who can give people comfort when they need it. And I think that's definitely an area that meshes well with my, you know, strengths and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always hear people say, you know, they'd rather do criminal law than family law because it gets pretty rough. Has that been your experience in family law, or have you been able to find ways around that stigma of like all the craziness that goes on with like a divorce or a separation.
Oh yeah, I mean that is something that people will say, almost in jest, but also in seriousness. They say they'd rather be defending someone who is accused of a crime than representing an ex going through a divorce, because you do see people at their worst. You see people at their really breaking points, because you don't come to a divorce lightly. You don't come to that life-changing decision. Say you weren't married and you have a child together, but you no longer want to be in that relationship. It's a really painful decision for people, and there's a lot of guilt and shame that comes with that. And so you get people at their worst, and you get people at their most vulnerable. There's so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the situation that you really I can empathize, and it's funny too, because just like no dentist wants a root canal, no divorce attorney wants a divorce, but I happened to go through that 2 years ago. So now I'm just like, I'm one of us, it's like it happens. You flip a coin, right? 50% of marriages, unfortunately, might meet that fate. And, I'm all for marriage. I'm all for people finding that person and making it work and sticking it out. But there are times when you reach a place where that decision needs to be made, and it's personal for every individual going through it. And I can at least see that if that person is struggling, if they are kind of showing you their nasty side, like you can at least hopefully guide them towards the light and show them that there is something on the other side.
Would it be safe to say that as opposed to criminal law, where there's I guess a right and a wrong, when it comes to this mediation and divorce and separation, there's sort of just a mitigation of damage that happens, or do you think that in every situation there's a way to kind of find the right answer for everyone?
I think there's absolutely a mitigation factor to it. That's a great way to look at it. You're just trying to make it okay for people going forward, and most importantly, their kids. When we're talking about criminal law, we're talking about a civil matter, a lawsuit involving some type of monetary damages or something like that. There are different burdens of proof, and you're out there to say to the court, this is what happened, and here's why you should believe me. And these are the facts, and this is why you should believe that these are the facts. And this is the law, and this is why you should apply the facts to the law in the way that is good for my client. There is a lot of that goes on in a family law matter. You do take into consideration what's happened and what people are doing. And if there is some wrongdoing going on, then certainly, if it's not good for a kid to be spending a certain amount of time with one parent, then that needs to be said, But at the end of the day, it's always going to be looked at from the court's point of view as what is the best interest of this particular child or children. What's going to be best for them given the circumstances, given where everybody is currently as they are. And what do we do moving forward? Is there going to be some type of family therapy that needs to happen? Is there going to be some type of, help for these kids, personal therapy for them? Are we going to look into guardian ad litem to come in and investigate their best interests? There's all these ways that the court can help, but at the end of the day, people need to make their own decisions, and they kind of have to step it up and act like adults too.
Yeah. So in terms of family law and divorce, can you walk us through the steps of what that looks like, and if someone's going through that, how does that process start?
That's a great question. So it starts with the decision to get a divorce. So, once that person has decided that, they start calling lawyers. It's very rare that they're calling lawyers without being certain that that's what they want to do. They don't have to necessarily hire an attorney to get them through the process. They can go to court themselves and file a petition, and then have that served on their spouse. They simply start with that. It's a petition. It's just like any kind of lawsuit or any kind of criminal indictment. It's where it starts. It gets served on the other side. The other side has a chance to respond, and they can either get an attorney to file an appearance, or they can just respond what they say pro se or self-represented, and then the court begins to be aware of the situation, but they still have time. They have, in most cases, the court date will be 90 days out or so. Depends on each county how they do it. But in Kane County, where I'm most familiar, the court date's always about 90 days out, for example. So you have time to kind of start settling things and start negotiating things. But in that time period, that's when people are in the most kind of upheaval, because they've got to figure out what's going to be the new normal. And there's really no rule at that point who gets what or who does what. So they got to figure that out either by themselves or through a mediator.
Yeah. You mentioned that you don't need an attorney, to start or even to get through the process. So I'd love to hear about your practice, and why somebody would choose to, hire you to navigate these waters.
That's a great question. I truly believe that knowledge is power and that people should feel empowered to go and handle their personal legal matters personally. However, if they have a lot of fear and uncertainty about what may happen, if they are feeling particularly vulnerable to the other side and their likely response or their likely behavior based on their filing, they do need an attorney to represent them and to advocate for them. So it's a personal decision. There's also a cost barrier that people have to consider. People can't always afford a retainer. I'm going to give a big shout out to the Justice Entrepreneurs Project of Chicago. That's where I got my start as a solo attorney, called the JEP, and they're doing so much good, where they are taking small law firms, either partnerships or solo firms, and it's an incubator. It's an office space that's shared. It's all these resources that are shared, and they teach us, and I am still a part of it. The billable hour is not conducive to the average American, average Chicagoan's, bank account, their budget. They have these constraints, and they can't afford necessarily a $5,000 retainer right off the bat, especially when they're dividing their household and they're trying to divide their assets. They're not necessarily equipped for that, especially if they're a young family, a young married couple, young kids, a lot of expenses. And so they've done away with the billable hour, and they've taught a huge cohort of attorneys how to run a successful business without charging by the billable hour, which is just really, it can creep up so fast. You'd be surprised how quickly a law firm can take someone's money and only get halfway through the case. I hate to speak ill of my colleagues and former classmates who are in these larger law firms. They serve a purpose, and they serve people who have a different income bracket. Yeah. So, they're just trying to bridge the gap. There's an access to justice issue, which is there are people who don't qualify for free legal aid, and they also can't afford these large retainers, knowing that retainer is not limited. People are often going to spend beyond their $5,000 or $7,500 retainer. That's the nature of the beast. But the JEP has taught attorneys how to empower people to make their own decisions and to do what they can on their own, and then also to be there to guide them and to help them taking a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, to their life, and working on those smaller issues that can make a big impact on their day-to-day lives, and then letting the people know how to function and how to go represent themselves. So we do like limited scope representation or collaborative law, a lot of mediation, a lot of alternative dispute resolution techniques, so that we kind of peel back the layers of the adversarial process, because that's where the bills come from.
Yeah.
I have a two-part question here. So at what point do the people looking to get representation come to you in that process? Is that right away, or is that when they've kind of settled their differences and kind of started that planning?
It's a variety. I think sometimes they come because they were blindsided. They were served with the divorce papers, and so they don't know what to do. They just know they better talk to an attorney, and they've got to know what their options are and what their rights are. I offer free consultations, which I think is really important, because I think, like I said, empowering people with the knowledge of what needs to happen next, even if I'm not the person for them, if they don't go with me, I still want them to know what the rights are. I like to be educational in that and tell them, here's what you can do and here's what I can do for you. But it's more to your question, when do they come to me in the process? It's just whenever they feel they really need an attorney, and everyone has a different threshold, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. The second part of that is, would you be able to walk us through that process of onboarding a client when they come in and they're looking to you for that help and they're kind of in that desperate stage? What's that process? How do you start out? Walk us through what that would look like for them.
What I try to do is I try to be very neutral, and I try to, be very transparent with people, because say one spouse comes to me and they want mediation, which is what I want them to want, because that's my bread and butter. That's what I want to offer to people, is the mediation. I do have other offerings, but specifically when it comes to mediation, they can come to me. They tell me, what's going on. It's a very brief phone call, and then I say, okay, well, if it's all right with you, I'm going to reach out to your spouse, and I'm going to have the same amount of time on the phone with them before we meet together, so that they know, that it is equal, it is unbiased, it is neutral. And I can let them know in an email, for example, I just spent 15 minutes on the phone with your spouse. They've told me that you're going through divorce and that you're considering mediation. In that case, I'd love to speak with you for 15 minutes of your time, just so we can try to narrow down a time and place where we can start mediation, if that's what you want to do. And people are often pretty receptive to that, because I don't want them to think, I'm on the opposite side already. I really want them to know that I'm neutral. So then we have, more of like a 30 to 45 minute call with the two of them and myself. And it could be on Zoom or it could be on the phone, whatever is more comfortable for them. But at that point, that's when I'm going to give them kind of the nuts and bolts of divorce, answer the questions they may have about it, find out if they have attorneys yet or not, and if they want to mediate with or without attorneys, they're welcome to do that. They're welcome to bring their attorneys and do it that way, or they're welcome to basically sit down in the conversation with just me. There's no right or wrong way to do that, but we do want to get the initial information out. Do they have kids? Do they have real estate that they own together in the marriage? What are we dealing with in terms of, does anybody want to move? Do we have a big dispute that needs to be handled right away? And then we try to get something on the calendar as soon as possible. And so that's kind of the intake, I guess.
Do people often feel like you're taking a side in the sessions and stuff?
I hope not. I really hope not. I think that, you can never know what they think. I only have, like every judge you might see on the bench, they only have their own life experience to go off of. And they're supposed to be neutral as well. And we all bring our implicit bias with us wherever we go, based on what we know about the world. But I'm always trying to question that in myself. I'm always trying to, look at, two different parents and look at them for the parent that they are. And I try to say co-parent. I try to use gender neutral language where I'm talking, I'm not saying, well, moms do this and dads do this. Even if I were to say something like that, it's not going to come across well to either person. Nobody wants their mediator to be biased, and I think we're all human. So it is something that in my mediation training I've been really mindful of, and I try really hard. That's a big part of this, and what makes mediation difficult at times too.
I was going to ask, do you find often that people are having a hard time come to a common middle ground, or are you finding that if they come to you before getting lawyers involved, that it's often a little bit easier to get to the middle ground?
I think that it depends on people's personality types, how cynical or skeptical they may be. But I really am not trying to hide the ball with anyone. I really want them to know that they're, there's only one driver's seat in a car, but they're both in the driver's seat. They're both driving their own, divorce. And at this point, we've got to figure out, how do they divide this household? They both have equal say in the matter. because that's how it is. They're supposed to be looked at equally in the eyes of the law, and I think that people just have different comfort levels with the entire judicial system that's going to come from their own life and their parents or their upbringing, what it may be. It's just I try to be open and honest with people, and I try to be fair. I like to say fair. I made an acronym kind of for my own business, but also to try to share with my clients. I want to keep this fair, and that stands for future-focused, affordable, integrative, and respectful. So we're not. The past is in the past. Whatever happened. But now what's happening is you got to parent these kids together, however that looks. Keep it affordable by not going and getting an attorney who's out for blood. There are these attorneys who maybe overpromise and say, oh, yeah, you're going to get this, that. They're going to get nothing. They're not going to get to see the kids. You're going to get all this money. If they're promising that, I say run for the hills, because that's just unrealistic. There is a balance, and the court's not going to allow that to happen. So why would a mediator or an attorney try to tell somebody that that's what's going to happen? I think I try my very best to put that at ease in people. But again, if they have their skepticism or their cynicism, I just want to give them the knowledge that they can use, and they don't have to make an agreement in my mediation session either. Okay. If we can agree on just one or two things, that's great. Yeah. Because then at least that's two or three, one or two things that they can take with them and go to an attorney and say, we already figured that out. You don't need that to be, hashed out. Don't even worry about it. But here are the issues that remain.
Yeah. So do you offer multiple sessions for people that are willing to come to you for mediation services? Yeah,
and I think that's kind of what sets me apart in my mediation kind of approach, because oftentimes the court will make you go to mediation if you don't agree and you get to a certain point and you're about to go to a hearing. Most local jurisdictions, their local rules are going to say if it's an issue of co-parenting, if it's an issue of parenting time or child support or something like that, you're going to at least have to go to one session of mediation. The way I look at it, I think, and what I'm trying to do here is give people the option of never having to go to court and going to mediation more often, early and often, in their process, so that they can set the tone that, if we can't agree on something, we're at least going to sit down with a mediator and we're going to try. And so I've got an approach where I do an initial mediation module where it consists of, 3 people or 5 people, if they have their attorneys, but both sides and me in a Zoom session, and then I can do breakout sessions with one side and then with the other, and try to keep that equal time, and then come to some type of an agreement in that initial module. But that's just going to be where we're talking about those initial agreements that need to be made, the temporary things of child support, parenting time, marital residence, who's going to live there, and how long are they going to live there together, and are they selling it, or is one person staying? These kind of things, but most importantly, what's happening with the kids and when. And then moving forward, we come back for another session, and we're going to talk about a more specific long-term planning piece, where it's not crucial that we decide who's taking how much of the retirement at this very moment, but it is important. Yeah. And it's not a pressing matter, but it will become a huge part of the discussion. So once we get the fires put out in the initial mediation module, then the next module is intended for people to focus on that. So my hope is that it's pay as you go. So they pay the initial amount, and it's the first session is going to be the more expensive one, and then the next session, because I have all the underlying info, we're just going to get to work on, get down to brass tacks. We're going to try to figure out the solution going forward. And I do pay as you go, meaning if you want to come back next week and get started, that's fine. We'll do that. And we can get this whole thing done in 6 weeks, 6 sessions. That'd be great. But it's going to be about $4,500 that way. Or is it going to be over the period of 6 months that you do that? But whatever is feasible for people.
Yeah.
So can you give us a general cost breakdown of having a mediator first? I heard you say something that was, early and often. So is that something? What's the cost breakdown versus going to a lawyer? Like is there a benefit to it?
I think so. Now there's a drawback to mediation too, which I'll explain in a moment. But the issue that with cost is that in your divorce, it's uncertain. It's uncertain how much you're going to need to spend because you don't know how the other side is going to respond. You don't know what their lawyer is going to do or if they're going to be without a lawyer, if the judge is going to say, hey, we can't decide anything today, come back in 4 weeks, and then you've got, no answers. You've got 4 weeks of resentment building. You've got 4 weeks of kids not knowing who's going to be picking them up from school. Things can happen in that time, and that's where phone calls to an attorney come up. Like, he did this again, she did that again. What do I do? The kid's not here when they're supposed to be, and what am I doing? There are a lot of these things that if you could just talk to one another, you'd get these answers and you'd be resolved. But instead, you call your attorney. They're not there because they're in court. So you're talking to their paralegal and you're explaining what's going on. And then are you getting billed for that call or not? Well, it depends on what your retainer says. So, the bills can really rise up. So anyway, when it comes to the cost comparison, I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars that can be, billed in those 4 weeks or something, tens of thousands of dollars over a few months. So you just have to be careful. People have to read what they're signing. People have to know what they're spending, what they're agreeing to, because nobody's doing any work for free. So we all have to be mindful how we spend our money, and we all have to be mindful how people are, giving us their services, because it comes with a cost. I've heard people say before that a highly contested divorce is a luxury. And it kind of is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be. People should be entitled to having some guidance and some help throughout this process because it's just daunting.
Yeah, we're not in the same kind of business at all, but we find the same thing. So many people that have gotten burned by, other website or marketing people that they've hired just because, we say it costs X amount, but if you want this, you got to pay more, and if you want this, you got to pay more. But I do think that's, just a much more honest way to do business is to be very upfront about your costs and be upfront about expectations,
Yes.
and gosh, in a field like law, I bet it's kind of hard to find that just generally.
Oh, I know. I mean, we're trained to be good talkers. We're trained to be, good at
Especially if you're billing by the minute, right?
Exactly. We're trying to persuade people that we're going to fight for them, and we are. And it is hard work, and there are times when I have worked in firms where we do bill by the hour, and I work really hard, and I try very hard to get the very best results for people. But it's like playing football, it's like you'd score a touchdown every time if it wasn't for the defense,
Right.
So you're gonna be up against a challenge, and you just never know how much pushback you're gonna get.
So have you ever mediated a divorce or separation where there's been like a business involved? Because that's something that I always think about as we own a business. Like, how would that work? And typically, what's the process with that? Because I think that's a pretty big thing, and it might not be common, but it's definitely common in terms of divorces. There's a lot of business owners that are having to go through that, and I think that could be a very heavy burden that's weighing on their shoulder.
Absolutely, and I think that's where a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt come in too. Because if we're not talking about your children, we're talking about your baby, which is your business.
Mm-hmm.
That's something they put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into. And for your spouse who maybe didn't really want much to do with it, now they're going to want their piece of that pie. It's really touchy.
Mm-hmm.
However, anything you bring into a marriage during the marriage is deemed marital in Illinois, at least I can say. It's marital property. Absent certain circumstances, if you had some type of a prenup or something, I can't even imagine what that might say if it said, any business we're going to make is going to be only this spouse and not the others. It's marital, so it's got to be divided, or it's got to be your assets in your marriage, your marital assets. They have to be allocated equitably. It doesn't mean equal. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're each going to get 50% of this
Right.
business. That's not going to work. You can't, if you don't want to be married to each other, you don't want to be running a business together. So maybe the answer to that kind of a question is, a buyout sort of situation, and that can, or it's just in exchange for a certain portion of investment accounts or retirement accounts or whatever it may be. There's different value to different things, and it's not always monetary. There's certain value to someone's business that if I can just, go my separate ways and I can still run my business and they can do this, that is going to be the answer. There are a lot of ways to handle it, and it's all negotiable. And that's another thing that I want people to realize is it's not cut and dry. It's going to be, we're going to look at these accounts, we're going to try to make things even, and we're going to try to make things equitable. But people come into marriages with different resources and assets and debts and liabilities, and people leave with differences. And so we got to do what's right for them under the eyes of the law, which is just basically an equitable distribution. And then what's practical and what makes sense and what is the least cumbersome, I think. What actually will help resolve the dispute overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, something you should go to a mediator for, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm happy to help people mediate something like that because, it's a business, and I run a business now. I know that it is something that you want to protect and that you want to keep if you can. And, yeah, it's definitely one of those things, isn't it?
Yeah. You mentioned that you've worked for bigger firms and you've had other jobs within this portion of the law, but I'd like to know what made you decide to, start your own practice. Is it conviction to do what's right for people, or was it money, or was it, I'm just curious to know.
Well, I will say, like I mentioned before, I went through my own divorce about 2 years ago, and in doing so, I realized that my ex, I call him the previous administration, he and I, we do a pretty good job of co-parenting. And we did a really good job, actually, of negotiating our divorce. I'll give him much credit to that because he's a lawyer, too. It could be a disaster. It could be something that worked out. It actually worked out that we were able to negotiate things without needing to hire our own attorneys. We were our own attorneys, I guess we paid enough of that for law school, it's like, that's the retainer, right?
Sure, right.
But we both managed to be civil and reasonable in most of it and come up with an agreement that worked for us and for our kids. Now, that being said, at a certain point, I was a single mom, and life gets tough when you're spread so thin. And so working for a bigger firm where the requirements are a 60-hour work week, 2,000 billable hours a year, it's a lot. And especially my kids are young. So it just wasn't really conducive to my life, and it wasn't really feasible for me. And I just was feeling so much pressure that I decided, well, I've been solo before. I was solo, back in 2017 to 2020, I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to go into the mediation route. And I had the blessing of the partners at the firm. I was sad to go. I still, think very highly of them, especially the ones I was with most recently. So, it was a decision based on personal need, but I used kind of my personal experience to try to build something that I think is going to be helpful. It's like, have you ever listened to the podcast, The Daily Stoic?
No, I haven't listened to it.
I highly recommend. Ryan Holiday, he studies and talks about Stoicism, and one of his quotes is, "The obstacle is the way." And I kind of internalized that. The obstacle is the way. Anything that I'm doing in my personal life, I try to practice what I preach. If I'm telling people, well, it's important for, kids to see both parents, then it's in my life, it's important for my kids to see both their parents. If I'm telling them, well, it's kind of nice when you can both show up at the soccer game and be there and both supporting your kid if that's at all possible, well, then you better believe I'm going to try, as long as my kid wants to play soccer. He's we did that for one season and it just was okay. But now we're doing Taekwondo. So.
Ooh, that's nice.
But yeah, we are. It was a personal decision to go solo, but I'm very personally satisfied with that decision.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's definitely a risk when you go solo. So what was it like going to your bosses at a large firm and saying, hey, this is something that I want to pursue? Was that a long decision that you had to come to terms with?
It was tough. It was very tough because I will say my most recent employment before going solo, I really loved that office. I really loved the people, and I enjoyed working with them every day. And I still, when I see them, I'm always happy to see them because I'm at like Kane County Bar Association events and things like that.
Yeah.
Their approach is to be the litigators, to be the advocates for the people who come to them. And there's a need for that. Like, don't get me wrong, not everybody can come in. I'm not Pollyanna. I believe not everything is sunshine and roses for people. We can't just eat a cake made out of sunshine and rainbows and be happy. We have to be realistic that there are people who are in need of fierce, zealous advocates, and that's kind of more of their style. And so I believe I had their blessing to go and pursue mediation. They send out a letter to our clients to let them know that that's what I was going to be doing, and it made sense. I think they could see that it made sense, and they could see that it could make sense for my family too, for me to kind of go in this role and do things at my own pace and work, and then parent and do the things I got to do.
Yeah, that's true with a lot of business owners. Obviously, when you're just starting, it can be a bigger time investment than a job. But having that freedom to, you got to take the afternoon off to go to Taekwondo practice or something, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to be there for your kids. They're only little for so long, and they need you.
Yeah.
Were there any strategies you learned working at a larger firm that you took with you coming to build your own practice? Absolutely.
I think I'm so grateful for the mentorship that I was able to receive at my previous firm. It was invaluable. I mean, these people, they had a combined year, what would you call it, experience level of, over 30 years of combined wisdom, and they had been there and done that and seen a lot. And they had a lot to say about the way we should treat our clients. I mean, they're about, being responsive to your clients. Bad news doesn't age well, so you've got to be on the phone and you've got to be responsive in your emails. I think that's with every business. You don't want to leave people hanging without a result because they'll go with someone else, and you want to treat your clients well. So that kind of thing. And also just the working hard and getting in there and being in front of the courts, because I do still represent people in a non-mediation role. If I were, just representing one client in their divorce, I still take a lot of their advice to heart and how I present myself to the court and how I formulate an argument and really go to bat for people. So that was really valuable stuff. And then just kind of their professionalism, top-notch, level of professionalism that they always showed their clients. And they're very hardworking people, and I aspire to be like them. I know that as I grow in my career and as my kids get a little older and things get a little easier, I hope to be as successful as they are.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are you hoping someday to have a firm that's, growing and you're hiring more people and you're, your own partner at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if this kind of style of mediation could take off, if we could kind of come up with this framework that could serve more people, and I could teach it to more people and have associates who mediate with a similar mindset, and that, we all kind of can triage that initial meeting, the initial mediation module with the two people who are just like, what are we going to do tonight, this week, next week with our kids as we're going through this divorce, and really trying to help people get a resolution sooner, like early and often, and then they can come back with, taking a sigh of relief, and they can come back and have someone who's like-minded, like me, mediate for them. If I could hire, associates at some point, I think that would be awesome. And then if it could be something where it's not just Illinois, but we go and there's co-family mediation for other states if we can branch out into my home state of Indiana or something like that just to start. But I do see the potential if I could just get that secret sauce, and teach it. I think that's exciting.
Yeah, and there's got to be some advantages of having your own, firm and practice and starting to build off of that. What are those advantages in your opinion versus having a larger firm represent you?
Well, you can always try something that may or may not give you the result that you want. I guess the question is always, like my dad likes to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? If you try something different with a client and if you try a new approach, do you find it successful? Did it give the client the result that they wanted? And do you feel you were paid enough for it, right? That's always that. So I like that aspect of being an entrepreneur where you can try something new and you can say, okay, well, I will take that case and I will try that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot, obviously we talk to a lot of business owners, and there's a pivot that a lot of them have to go through. You start your business with one idea in mind, and then you end up having to really shift. Have you had a situation like that yet, or are you still kind of trying to experiment to see if you've got the better way, if you've got the secret sauce or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with me, I see something shiny and I go for it or something. I'm like excited and I want to do as much. Anybody who comes to me, I want to help them. I don't want to turn away business.
Yeah.
And so one thing I have found is like I've actually randomly had a few more adoption cases come around where I really enjoy doing that area of law, practicing in adoption law. That's where I started with when I was in the JEP, and I was solo for those few years before I went to another firm. I was doing several adoption cases, and it's a very specified area of family law. So some of those cases have come up, and I'm like, I'm not going to turn them down because I really enjoy it, and I like to try to get people through that. They're in a vulnerable state as well, and to help talk them through it and help them come up with terms for an open adoption agreement, for example. I enjoy that area of law, and I enjoy doing that. So, like, I don't want to turn down those kind of things. And so, but at the same time, it's like I'm sure you hear people talk all the time in entrepreneurial circles about what's your hamburger, what's going to be your niche, what's going to be your one thing. Because if you can do one thing really well and repeat it, that's going to be where you're going to thrive. Whereas if I'm going to do, mediation and collaborative law and adoption and estate planning, am I going to spread myself too thin? I think that's every solo attorney's question is, how do they market and try to get the right clientele coming in, and how do they refer out the business that they should. And it's just all about growing and trying things, doing it in what feels right, not taking on more than you can handle, and doing good work for people.
Yeah, Anthony and I talk about that all the time. Obviously you can do a lot of different things, and you can do a great job at a lot of different things, but if there's something that's the most profitable or you can provide the most value in, how you're going to present your brand, that's who you're going to present it to. That's who you're going to market it to is the clients that you can help the most and the best.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of one of your cases that you think was like, just a great case, something that went well, and, is that something was it like an adoption case, or is it more mediation?
Well, I'm thinking of maybe two different ones. And one more recently is an adoption case where just the clients were very happy that I was able to kind of navigate a little bit of an emotional aspect to it, because as you can imagine, it's very emotional. And it was a private adoption, so that means that, there wasn't an agency involved. It wasn't a foster situation, a DCFS case, but it was just a situation where people were just trying to act in the best interest of the child, and these hopeful adopting parents were wanting to adopt. And I was able to kind of navigate that because of what I had learned previously from other more experienced attorneys. I actually called one and asked. She was always my mentor when it came to adoptions. I said, what do I do in this situation? Because here's what's going on. And she said, well, X, Y, and Z. She kind of reminded me of what the law is. I knew what it was, but it's always nice to have somebody to kind of collaborate with. I went back to the clients and I said, here's what we're going to do. And I think just being able to be certain about what we're going to do, that's very valuable. I think, if you can tell people, okay, it's not going to be that bad. Here is the law. Here's how we're protected in the law. And here are our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And here's what we need to do. And we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to discuss this with the other side, and we're going to make sure that the other side is represented, and we're going to make sure that this is all fair and that this is ultimately agreed upon. And we were able to make it work. And so I think for that, I'm like, that kind of comes down to experience. I felt pretty confident about, the outcome of that situation. And I especially was touched that, my clients felt grateful, and they told me that. That's always nice when you get that positive feedback, positive reinforcement, and encouragement to go forward.
Yeah, definitely. Donny and I always, talk like, oh, we need like a mentor. So is that something that you said you have that one person you called? Is that someone that's been a mentor throughout your career?
Yeah, I guess I've mentioned a few mentors already. I guess I never want to burden one person with all my stuff, so
Right,
I always try to spread it out a little bit. And so if I've got an issue that's particularly challenging in one area of law, I'm going to go to the person I've discussed that kind of thing with before. And I always try to be mindful that, I am asking for their time and their opinion, but that's what you do when you are in a professional setting and you have colleagues who do the same thing. And that's why I'm in bar associations, and that's why I join these committees and try to talk with other attorneys about these things, because that's where you gain a lot of wisdom. And yeah, I think it's so nice to have a mentor, but mentors don't always look like what they look like in, TV shows or something. You might have many different people.
Yeah. Can you share some setbacks you may have had or some challenges you've had throughout your career or even just getting into law school?
Oh, I'm not going to talk about that. No, I'm just kidding. No, I did have some setbacks even trying to get into law school. I had so little confidence in myself that I just thought, how am I ever going to, do that? And I had to overcome that a lot. I think one of my biggest adversaries has always been myself. And I've learned over the years to be kind to myself, be my own cheerleader, to try to get in there and say, look, I am just as capable as anybody else. I have this background, like this imposter syndrome that people talk about these days. It's like you really have to grapple with that and try to get rid of those self-doubt moments where you're just thinking, well, if I got into this school, then anybody could. Why would you think that? That's not the case. That's just not the case. If I did this, then that means it's not that great. Well, no, don't talk to yourself that way. Would you talk to a friend that way? You have to start doing that every day, giving yourself those positive affirmations. But I would say going through law school, I was always so insecure, and I was always so nervous and anxious all the time about things that, it was all I was projecting on myself. Like I was thinking, this professor thinks I'm stupid. This study group probably thinks I have nothing good to offer. But what? I don't have that. I can't read people's minds. So that's coming from my own mind, And so you have to challenge those thoughts. And I've done a lot of therapy, a lot of self-help books, a lot of Brene Brown TED Talks. I've really reached out to try to fix that in myself, that I don't need to have that much self-doubt. It wasn't serving me. So
yeah, definitely. I think I kind of experienced the same thing going through school, going through business school, doing marketing, and always thinking, are these projects we're putting together going to work? Am I going to find a job when I graduate? What is everybody else doing? And then I slowly started to realize that, as time goes on, you are, like you said, it's going to be yourself to kind of pull you out of that situation. And it's how you think and changing your mindset. And that's been instrumental to what we've done and what Donny and I have put together. So is there advice that you have for people that are going through that someone's going through law school and maybe experiencing that? What's really been the key factors for you? In that?
I think advice I would give, maybe if I were to just go and talk to myself, as a first-year law student, I would be like, look, you didn't get here overnight. You didn't get here by luck. You didn't get here by anything other than your credentials, and people saw what you had to offer and they offered you a spot in this school. And so if somebody is in law school right now, wherever they may be, they should be proud of themselves and they should be realistic in the fact that, like, you have something to offer. Someone saw something. There was an admissions person reading your file and they thought, yeah, I would admit them. So they admitted you. So, okay, good. So now go take that class and go and study. And if if you don't get the best grade, you're still going to learn things from that. You're still going to be challenged by the bar exam at some point. You are going to have to show what you know, and eventually you get the degree and then you pass the bar exam and you rise to the occasion. That's another thing for my Aunt Elizabeth, the judge. Rise to the occasion. You are here for a reason, and somebody decided that you were capable of doing this, so decide it for yourself as well and believe it.
I'm not totally sure what the career path looks like, and that's awesome advice too about just rising to the occasion, and you have to be what you need to be in the time that it comes. So, but I'm just curious. Are you hoping one day to be a judge?
That is so weird that you say that, because I would love to be a judge someday. I think it would be an honor of a lifetime to do that. I'm just right now, I'm out there grinding, trying to get the experience of being a lawyer, but now in this role of being a mediator. I almost, I felt like I was in a judge's position for a little bit there when I was in a recent mediation where both people were represented by counsel.
Yeah.
Because, to be talking to them, but also to their attorneys, and to be trying to come up with a resolution. I mean, that's what a lot of attorneys do with the judge, is they go into chambers and they speak with the judge, and the three minds together are able to say, okay, this is what needs to happen for this particular child and their parents, and what needs to happen going forward. And then that way it kind of keeps the peace, but it's also, it felt kind of like that role, even though it wasn't at all like that. I wasn't making decisions that were binding legally, but we were coming up with ideas and solutions. And so as a mediator, I really enjoyed being in that kind of position. And a lot of times a good judge will say, I'm just calling balls and strikes. I'm just here to uphold the law, and the attorneys are there to, make their arguments for their clients, and then the clients are ultimately there, the litigants themselves are there to either agree or go to a hearing,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're pretty suited to it, just with my limited knowledge, because you had such a sparkle in your eye talking about your aunt, and then also how the first 20 minutes of our conversation, you just were talking about fairness. You really, really wanted to represent both of the parties, and so I think I don't know, it just sounds unique with most lawyers, like you said, they're representing one client and one interest. So even though they're looking, they have a passion for the law, presumably, and they want fairness, they're representing one person, but you kind of being in this mediator position, you do have two different perspectives, and oftentimes if they're in a divorce, they're totally different perspectives. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It's such a compliment. I'm going to be like on cloud nine the rest of the day.
Well, I do have other questions, so I'm going to bring it back now. I actually didn't tell you this, but I wanted to be a lawyer myself. So for a long time when I was in high school, I thought that's what I'm going to do. So I went and did like the law classes and stuff. I sat in on, cases in Kane County. I went in and sat in like an armed robbery case.
Oh gosh.
And then on I think like speeding traffic and things like that. And then I had an attorney come into the school, and he basically out of his speech convinced me not to go into law. And so, of course, I didn't. But I don't know. I think it may have been for a good reason. I think I like where I'm at. But a question I always had was, someone who just gets out of law school, what is the steps for them in terms of getting an idea of what they actually want to do? Because I know you always had an idea of going into family law. I was thinking of doing criminal. Is there a way where you could say, okay, if I want to specialize this, I need to go join this group or this networking or this bar association or anything? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I will say you should be very proud of where you are because this is amazing. Like, I think this is so cool that you've built this marketing firm and that you're doing podcasts and you're doing all the digital marketing that you're doing and everything. It's so helpful. So I'm grateful for you. And I think that what you do sounds a lot more fun than some of the legal stuff that I do sometimes. So
He's blushing.
yeah, I mean, it's just true. Life is what you make it, right? And your career is what you make it. And if you want to go into criminal law or if you want to go into family law, when you go in, you do want to kind of start taking those courses, and then you're going to be around those professors who are going to have special guest speakers come in who are going to come from the firms who are representing that clientele, and so your career path gets kind of formulated throughout the 3 years of law school. But I will say in Illinois there are a lot of ethical rules about whether or not you can consider yourself a specialist in things. It's kind of, I don't know, seems like a pedantic rule in my eyes, but it is what it is. You're not supposed to say that you specialize in these things, but you can say that you are you offer these types of services, and even that I may be off on this specific rule. I don't even know, but there are rules against saying that you're an expert on something or you're a specialist.
Right.
But you can prioritize or set yourself out, when you hang your shingle and you want to open up a law firm, you don't have to take every case, and you probably don't want to do that either. You do kind of want to differentiate yourself by saying, we handle family law, or we handle estate planning, and we handle bankruptcy. You can kind of just say what kind of attorney you are or what kind of experience you have.
Yep.
It's like when you don't have experience yet, what do you say? But you just try to use what you've got.
Yeah, definitely. I think it goes hand in hand with when we first started. It was, well, we don't have a lot of experience, but what have we done? What can we put together? But yeah, that makes sense. So I'm curious for future goals, what you have coming up. Do you have anything good in the pipeline in terms of new offerings with your mediation services?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm realizing is that sometimes I'll get someone on the phone who earnestly wants mediation, but their spouse doesn't. So I'm looking into and have been offering collaborative law, which the only difference there is that, I would be representing one side, and then the other side, I'm in more of a collaborative role where I'm like, let's all sit down, either whether you're represented by counsel or not, we'll sit down, we'll have a conversation. They would have to either represent themselves and file their own appearance, or they would get an attorney to represent them who also does collaborative law. And we come up with basically the entire agreement before we even go to court, and then we file the petition. We say, we've got, it's almost like starting with the end in mind, where we're like, before we even have to go to court to even consider having a hearing on these issues, let's hash it out. Let's figure out what the agreements are going to be. And the nice thing about being the collaborative law attorney is that I can actually draft all the documents, and I can, present them to both sides and say, okay, this is what, I'm still representing my client's best interests, but being open and reasonable and negotiable with the other side, as opposed to being like taking a hardline stance on things. So I do want to offer more collaborative law, and I've actually even thought about, doing co-family mediation and collaborative law. It's just a long title, but, it could be the fine print underneath or something. But, trying to market that, which, I'm definitely going to pick your brain about those kind of things, I
already have an idea. You just saying that, I already got something cooking. So.
Exactly. That's why I'm glad I'm here, because, I know that you guys are going to help me out a lot, and I think that it's good. It's good to bounce these things off and to try to explain what it is that I do and what it is I'm hoping to do. Because I want to offer that. I do want to keep representing clients if I can as their advocate.
Definitely. So right now, what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of you? I know you have a website. Do you have a URL, or it's cofamilymediation.com, right?
Yes, cofamilymediation.com. I started doing some TikTok. I'm on there. I'm on Facebook.
Nice.
Trying to get the word out and trying to market myself in those ways. But yeah, that's the biggest one, is just to go to my website. I have an intake form people can fill out, or they can schedule online just through my website. They can schedule an appointment with me.
Good. Okay. Definitely. Yeah, and I just want to know, so everyone who's watching, if you guys need Chrissie's services, then definitely go to the website and give her a call. I just want to say, thank you again for coming on the show. And, we definitely learned a lot by having you on. And, law is something that I know a little bit about, but definitely it's great to have somebody who's in front of us that can explain these different things. Because it's, as you know, it's, probably going to go down the rabbit hole if you ever need, your services, right?
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be on here, and I hope that if anybody out there is listening and they're going through a divorce, that whether they hire me or not, they know that there's light on the other side. It is that C.S. Lewis quote: "There are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind," and I truly believe that. 2 years out of my divorce, I'm so happy where I am. I'm co-parenting as well as possible. My kids and their dad have and they spend just slightly more time with him than they do with me. So, it's like it all works for us. And it's a really good thing we've got going. And I want to leave one little kind of parting note, little story, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Because I just love podcasts. And so whoever's still listening at this point, maybe they like podcasts too. The best thing that ever happened to me after my divorce was I was lucky enough to go on Zach Braff and Donald Faison's podcast, and them from Scrubs. So that was like my favorite show growing up. And I called in because they needed to talk to somebody about co-parenting after the pandemic. And I was like, I know a little bit about that. I was going through it. I was just literally, my divorce was just being finalized when I got the call to be on the show. And so I got to go on and talk. And Zach Braff's mom had written a book about co-parenting and about divorce specifically for children and how to get through it and that kind of thing. So anyway, it was just this awesome little call that I had. And lo and behold, a man across the pond in England was listening. And I tweeted something like, "I was just on my favorite podcast. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy." And he tweeted at me, "Well, you were brilliant." And I was like, "Brilliant? Who's this guy?" That's such a nice compliment. Well, he became my best friend. We were just kind of on Twitter and the DMs, just going back and forth with literally pen pals, and never really thought anything could ever happen. But we're getting married. So, you just never know. Life can take you in a lot of different directions. And I'm an optimist through and through. And so I hope that, anybody out there who might be listening to this because they were like, "Oh, a divorce mediator, I kind of want to see what she says." I hope they'll take away that, divorce is hard, but you get through it. And there's so much beauty and so much grace on the other side.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great
Thanks for that
advice.
story. It's very uplifting. And thanks again for coming on. Seriously, this is a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.